Welcome back to the Law News Network, everybody. I'm Aaron Keller. I'll be with you for the next hour here, and we're just listening to the end of the day's testimony in the Adrian Loya case out of Barnstable, Massachusetts. The judge was very, very, very careful to tell the jury, look, this is a holiday weekend and we're on Cape Cod. Do not discuss this case with anyone you might come into contact with. I can imagine that admonition is more important perhaps today than it would be on any other day and in such a location other than maybe Memorial Day weekend, because the Cape is probably going to be packed this weekend. People are going to be at backyard parties. People are going to be camping, and the temptation may be there for people to try to say, hey, I wonder what case you're on, because people in that area are paying very close attention to what's going on in this particular case. Again, if you're just joining us, it's the case of a Coast Guard member who's accused of driving all the way from Virginia up to Massachusetts, shooting and killing another Coast Guard member, shooting and injuring that Coast Guard member's wife, and then shooting and injuring a responding police officer. The defendant is arguing that he's not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, but it's going to be a really tough case for the defendant to make out, because under Massachusetts law, the prosecution has the burden of proving that he was indeed not suffering from a mental disease or defect. In other words, in Massachusetts, the prosecution has the burden of riding over the top of that defense that the defendant is trying to promulgate here. So the defendant's story ultimately is that the reason he committed this murder is because the victim whom he killed had tried to come on to him when they were in the service in Alaska. The story that the defendant is telling is that it was somehow a sexual assault, but the facts that he's alleged are sound more flirtatious than, if we're to believe them, than that any kind of actual sexual assault would have occurred, because sexual assault involves a touching of private areas that's unwanted. So that was never alleged by the defendant at all. A very bizarre case, a horrific crime, just home invasion, shots fired, 2 people injured, a victim dead. Let's go and listen to some of the earlier testimony from today. This was a friend of the defendant's who was called to the stand by the state.
Sir, just please raise your right hand. Solemnly swear that the testimony you shall give to the court and the jury and the issues now pending before the Commonwealth and the defendant as the bar shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Sir, in a nice loud voice, could you state your name and could you spell your last name?
I'm Jacob Heller, Heller.
And where do you currently live?
Long Beach, California.
And drawing your attention back to when you were in high school and grade school, did you live in California then?
No, I lived in Texas.
Okay, whereabouts in Texas?
El Paso, Texas.
And did you know an Adrian Loya?
Yes, I did.
Do you still know him?
Yes, I do.
Do you see him in court here today?
Yes, I do.
Where is he, please? Just where is he sitting and what's he wearing?
That's him right there.
May the record reflect he's identified the defendant, Your Honor.
So noted.
And how would you characterize, sir, your relationship with Mr. Loya?
Friendship.
And when did that start?
In high school, I believe.
And what were the circumstances surrounding your, in high school, relationship to Mr. Loya?
I believe we were in the same Spanish class, and we both disliked the class and thought it was boring, and we sat near each other and developed a friendship based on that.
And what common interest did you share with Mr. Loya, if any?
Video games. To be honest, I don't really remember a lot of my interest in high school.
Fair enough, fair enough. But one of them was you enjoyed video games, and so did he, fair to say?
Yes.
And would you play video games together?
Yes.
And are we talking about maybe an hour a day, or would it be something a little more intense than that?
I mean, obviously we hung out a lot. So it could be anything from, hanging out after school for an hour or more, or maybe sleepovers or things like that.
And I apologize, I may not be that, familiar with the different kinds of games and stuff, but what kind of video games did you two enjoy?
Like console games and PC games, mostly cooperative.
Okay, explain what all that means, please.
Games played on a personal computer, cooperative games usually involve working as a team to overcome some obstacle or objective, maybe winning a race or killing a monster.
In about what years would this have been, do you know?
That's a tough one.
Okay, well, the only reason I'm asking would be, was the internet available for you to play against other people that weren't where you were?
I believe it was.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And again, with video games, aren't there things like first-person shooters versus like other types? What types of games did you?
Place and time for this, still in high school?
Yeah, but back when he was in high school. So you go ahead and answer.
Yeah. Yeah, there are all types of games we played. Everything from Mario Kart, which is like a racing game, to maybe Call of Duty games, which you play a soldier and you complete mission objectives, to things like League of Legends, which is a cooperative team fighting game, I guess, adventure fighting.
And were there any other interests that you shared with Mr. Lawyer back in high school?
We were on the swim team together. We hung out a lot, just in general.
And would you watch movies, for instance?
Yeah.
What types?
The popular movies of the day, I suppose.
All right. Well, was there a specific focus on science fiction as opposed to romance?
Perhaps that's fair to say.
All right. And were there any, with respect to Mr. Lawyer, were there any specific franchises? And do you know what I mean by that for a movie?
Yeah, like a movie franchise, yes.
Right, like a Star Wars, Star Trek, something like that?
Yeah.
That he particularly liked?
I believe he really liked Star Trek, but we watched all sorts of...
Now, Star Trek, there were movies and there were TV shows. Did the interest expand, also include the TV shows as well?
To be honest, I don't know.
Fair enough. So you didn't share that with him watching the TV shows?
I did, but not Star Trek in particular.
Okay. What ones would you watch? What TV shows would you watch with him?
I can't remember.
Okay. Was there a genre, though, or would they be just any kind of shows? Or would it be the science fiction?
Yeah, popular shows. Probably science fiction or adventure genre.
Okay. Now, were you in the same class in high school? I don't mean like Spanish class. I mean graduated the same year class.
I believe we were.
All right. Did you graduate from high school?
I did.
And did he?
He did.
What did you do after graduating from high school?
I applied for the JET program.
What's that?
It's a program where you work for the Japanese government teaching English in Japan.
And did you get accepted to that?
I did.
All right. Did you go there?
Well, I'm sorry, I went to college first.
Right.
And then I went into the JET program.
Okay, fair enough.
Yes.
Now, during the 4 years that you were in college, were you keeping friendship with Mr. Loya?
Yeah, as best I could,
How you would do that?
via Skype or text messaging or email.
All right. And would you continue to play games?
Yes.
And would you be able to play with him even though you weren't in the same area?
Yes, that's right.
All right. And what games were you playing then, if you remember?
Probably the same types of games.
Okay, fair enough. What part of the state or the country, when you went to college, did you go to?
I lived in Washington, D.C.
Okay. Do you know where he was while you were in college?
Maybe basic training
For what branch?
for the Coast Guard.
For the Coast Guard. And had you had any discussions with him about his joining the Coast Guard?
I guess, yeah.
Okay, do you remember basically why he said he wanted to join the Coast Guard?
Not really. I think he joined because he had no other specific interests or plans.
Fair enough. And at some point, did you learn that he had chosen a specific area within the Coast Guard to focus on?
You mean like a job?
Yes.
Wise? I can't remember.
All right. Did you become aware at some point that he was involved in the IT services?
Yes, that's right.
And did you ever have any discussions with him as to why he chose to go into the IT?
Not really, but I believe he joined that branch because he wanted to be challenged.
Okay.
And it was interesting.
Now, And this was while you were still in college, correct?
Yes.
All right. So at some point, you joined, was it the JET program, JET?
Yes.
And did you go to Japan?
Yes, I did.
Did you keep in touch with Mr. Loya during that time?
Yeah.
Do you know where he was stationed during that time?
During JET?
Yes.
To be honest, I don't know.
Fair enough. Was there a point where you were in Japan and you knew that he was in Alaska?
I don't know if that was when I was in Japan, but there was a point where I knew he was in Alaska, yes.
And how often would you two correspond to each other during this period of time?
Infrequently.
Okay.
Maybe once every 2 months.
All right. And how would the circumstances surrounding that be? Would you text him and he'd text right back?
Usually we would log on to an online game of some kind, and we would start a game, and then we would just talk while we were playing.
Okay. And is that something that you could do because there was a message screen or something while you're playing?
I think mainly we spoke via Skype.
So would you be playing the game on one computer while you were Skyping on another one, or just explain how that would work? I don't understand.
The game might be full screen on the computer, but in the background there would be the Skype application running, providing voice chat, which was a separate from the game entirely, but a separate program.
So I see. So you could actually be playing the game and speaking to whoever's on the other side of the Skype, right?
That's right.
And that's what you would do with Mr. Loya, correct?
That's right.
Now, up until the point, would that have been when you were in Japan or after you came back, or both?
I want to say both, but it's hard for me to say that with.
Fair enough. Now, did you ever have any conversations with Mr. Loya concerning a Lisa?
Yes, I did.
When did they start?
At some point during his time in Alaska.
All right. Do you remember if that was after you were back from Japan or while you were still in Japan?
I do not.
Fair enough. And up till that point, just basically how long had you known Mr. Loya? Right before the conversations about Lisa began.
I want to say since high school. I don't know how many years it was.
Fair enough. You said you first met him in a Spanish class, right? You have to say yes or no.
Oh, yes, yes.
Thank you. And do you remember what year you were in school for that Spanish class? Was it freshman year or was it senior year?
I believe it was freshman year,
Okay, so it was basically the full 4 years of high school that you knew him, right?
as far as I.
You were on the swim team together. Was that freshman year or sophomore, or do you know?
It was freshman or sophomore year, I think.
And being on the swim team, how many other individuals were on the swim team? About, doesn't have to be exact.
Maybe 10 to 12 people,
All right, and were they all men or were they men and women?
men and women.
All right, and were there coaches on that, for those teams?
Yes,
And would you have meets with other teams?
that's right.
And obviously, you would be going up against the kids from the other team, right?
Yes,
And after the swim meets, would there be any social gatherings?
occasionally.
All right. And would there be buses to and from these meets?
I think so.
Okay, you didn't drive your own car to get to the meets, did you?
I don't remember.
Okay. And during that period of time that we're talking about, up until the point where he started talking about Lisa, were there any concerns that you had concerning his mental health?
I don't remember.
You certainly didn't tell anybody about them, did you?
That sounds correct, yes.
And now, when he starts talking about Lisa, okay, focusing in on that time,
Okay.
tell us what he was telling you about Lisa.
He told me that he met someone who was either on his same base or in his unit or who worked close to him, and that he found kind of a kindred spirit, and they had a lot in common.
Okay, now, you may have said this, if you did, I apologize, but this was when he was in Alaska?
As far as I understand it, yes.
Okay. And did those conversations that you had with him, as intermittent as they may have been, if they involved Lisa, did that tone change at any point?
Did the tone change?
Yeah, you just described he's saying, I met somebody, kindred spirits. Did they remain that way, or did they change, or just stay the same?
It's hard for me to say.
Okay. Were you concerned at any point about this, Lisa?
I was, yes.
In what way?
I guess as time went on, he was more and more interested in befriending her, befriending her wife. At some point, the conversations we had, I was under the impression that, they were going to get married. Yeah.
Just so we can clear that all up. So when you said they were going to get married, you don't mean Mr. Loya and
No.
Lisa, right?
I'm talking about Lisa and her wife.
Right. So when you were talking with Mr. Loya, he was at some point informed you that she was in a same-sex marriage or a same-sex relationship leading to marriage, right?
That's right.
And what was his communications to you about that?
That he thought it was maybe his first time seeing that.
Okay. Well, was he saying that he was in favor of it?
It's his witness.
Yeah. You can't lead your witness.
That's fine. Tell us what he told you.
I'm sorry.
Tell us what he told you about the same-sex marriage between Lisa and Anna.
I don't remember
That
any.
was testimony from earlier today of a friend of the defendant, and that was what made up the bulk of the day's testimony, at least from a trial watcher standpoint, perhaps, because a lot of the other evidence we've seen is just very forensic in nature. Julie Rendelman is back from what I hope was a restful vacation that
Yes.
didn't result in any damage to your cell phone by chance.
It did not.
Shockingly.
Yeah, everyone is safe and sound.
After the phone nearly drowned in a pond or something.
Yeah, I have to do a shout out to my local phone company because it lasted 40 hours underwater.
Well, hey, great, excellent.
Don't want to brag, but
So anyway, we're talking about the Loya case here, and a couple of things just seem to me that this defendant is sunk. And people tell me oftentimes I apparently have a reputation in the wide world for somehow being pro-defendant. I don't know why I get that reputation, but apparently that's a reputation I have. I just call the shots the way I see it.
yeah, I don't know if I see you that way. I think you call you.
I just call the shots like the law says this can happen. The law says
Yeah,
there's a greater than not probability of an acquittal or a conviction here. So in this
agree.
case, I think that I'm going to be shocked if this guy is not convicted of every single count against him.
Sure.
Because we've got his own interrogation where he admits to intent, premeditation, 2 years of planning, putting a deer camera up in a tree to spy on the victims.
Right.
Explains everything he did, has basically the body camera where he records the whole thing, talks about the fake bombs. He's got the 250-page letter, manifesto, whatever you want to call it. So I just don't really see much room for this guy to try to wiggle out of some of these charges.
Right. Well, that's why they're going with the defense they're going with, because they realize that the evidence is overwhelming against him. They realize the only option they have is to go with some type of mental disease or defect. I mean, you can't say he didn't do it. He's caught, red-handed, and there's no self-defense. There's no defense, and the only defense is mental disease or defect. And kind of some of the things you describe, while are overwhelming in regards to his guilt, are also a little indicative of him having some type of mental illness, because it's not normal to kill someone.
Yeah.
But it's also not normal to do the things you do that are leading up to this death. The question becomes whether or not he's legally mentally ill to get him out of this.
I've asked everybody else this question over the last couple of days, and I'm curious as to your opinion, because you're accused oftentimes of being the most prosecutorial defense
You're
attorney.
going to say I was
because
accused of being the most mentally ill, but I was going to say that's a whole other conversation. Go ahead.
I'll just keep that conversation off the
Okay,
air.
yeah.
So look, you've worn both hats.
Yeah.
This guy is acting cray-cray, okay? But I don't know if that meets the, well, I don't think it meets the legal definition of mental disease or defect, because that question is not a psychiatric diagnosis. It's a question as to whether or not basically he knew right from wrong.
Exactly.
Did he know that what he was doing was wrong under the law? Well, I think that he admitted that. He said
Absolutely.
in the interrogation that he knew the police were going to show up, and he thought that the police would kill him.
Which is what he expected to happen, right?
Yeah, well, you don't expect the police to show up and shoot and kill you unless you know you're doing something wrong.
Right. Yeah, no, I don't, yes, he is cray-cray, but I don't think his cray-cray rises to the level that the defense is looking for. And I think that I'm confident that they fully understand that they have quite an uphill battle. And the thing is, it sounds more like a guy who was kind of seeking revenge on the woman and her wife. I mean, it seems like he really he was, whether it was logical that he should have been so upset about what went down that caused him the trouble, back when he was in the Coast Guard or not, he himself believes that she hurt him or screwed him in some way.
Destroyed his life.
Right.
Did something to warrant him not getting a promotion,
Which is
affecting him
not
financially.
which is not rational. But the response to it, which is to say, she did something to me, I'm going to do something to her, and these are the things I'm going to do to her, it seems to me clear that he fully understands what he's doing is wrong, and doesn't seem to care.
Yeah, he specifically said that I want to exact revenge, basically.
Sure.
I'm paraphrasing it, but that's the crux of the interrogation. So I said earlier with Ken Belkin that this defense attorney, from what I've seen, seems very sharp. He seems very competent, but I think he's at a game of poker and he's only been dealt one card, and it's a joker.
Right.
He's trying to play, 7-card draw with really not much in a hand to play.
But do you blame him? I mean, he's going to trial. He has to make a defense. He has to make and try to make a strong defense. He has this man's hand, life in his hands. So he's got to do what he's got to do. I mean, look, considering the little bit of evidence I think there is, he seems to be doing a pretty good job.
I think the defense attorney is doing as good of a job as he can with
Sure.
the lousy hand he has to work with. I think he seems very sharp. He seems very competent. The way that he's handling cross-examinations of witnesses that are in no way in his favor,
Sure.
I think is the old strategy of get in and get out quickly, because you're not going to get anything to help you out of that witness.
Yeah,
especially
I think,
some of the forensic and the government witnesses.
Well, none of that's ever going to
friends.
help you.
Yeah.
But like example, when he talks about one of his friends who seemed to understand from years ago that this guy was mentally ill. In fact, I think there was some conversation he said when his friend confronted the defendant and said, like, are you okay? Like, what is wrong with you? So he's trying to lay the groundwork, not just that he wasn't well then, but that he has been mentally ill for a very long time. And he's using his friends to kind of explain that. And quite honestly, if we separate ourselves, there is something quite sad about kind of the whole scenario, because you did have a guy who could have been something, had everything going for him. And there's no question that there's a mental illness there that is impacting his decisions. Again, though, it doesn't rise to the level what the law requires to get him out of this.
Yes, I agree with that analysis perfectly, based on the evidence that I have seen thus far. And I say it with that caveat because we don't know all of what's coming out next. Let's continue listening to some of this testimony from the friend earlier, because I think that part of the reason the prosecution put this friend on the stand was to try to get some evidence that maybe this wasn't just the defendant reacting to what the defendant told police was a quote-unquote sexual attack, but maybe it was that the defendant had some feelings for the victim.
Caused you concern?
I believe that the tone of his conversations was concerning, because he would bring up the fact that she was in a relationship, but he seemed very strongly interested in getting closer and closer to her, to Lisa.
And do you remember how soon it was during these conversations that he had mentioned that she was in a same-sex relationship?
I do not.
Okay, fair enough. Did you have further conversations in which Lisa was mentioned?
She was the focus of many conversations.
Tell us about those, please.
He would describe the working environment, working alongside of her. He would describe trying to befriend her wife, or meeting her on the base in various situations.
And how would he describe those, as good or bad experiences, if at all?
He seemed to see them as good experiences.
Did that continue throughout the entire time that you had conversations involving Lisa?
No.
When did it change, if it did?
I believe it changed when there was an incident at her apartment, and I don't know exactly what happened, but he described that he was, for some reason, he was at her apartment at night, and they were drinking and watching a television show together. He said that she maybe made some sort of advance towards him, and he refused somehow and left. But he expressed great concern because he believed, at least he expressed to me, that he believed that that event could somehow jeopardize his place in the Coast Guard or his pay or his job or something like that.
Okay, is that the extent of what he said about that incident to you, what you just told the jury?
As far as I can recall, yes.
Fair enough. Now, did you become aware at some point he was being transferred from Alaska to someplace else?
I was aware of that, yes.
Tell us about that.
To be honest, I don't remember a lot of details. I just know that he told me at some point that he was going to have to pick a new place to go or submit choices. And then that he did that. It's a long time ago. I could not tell you.
Fair enough. If it doesn't help, that's okay. Where did you start from when you were going cross country? From what part in the country?
Virginia.
Okay. And why Virginia?
I believe that's where he was stationed at the time, before he moved.
All right. So this would have been before Alaska, though. You said that, right?
That's right.
Okay. So were you in D.C. then?
I don't know.
Okay. So anyhow, how were you going to be traveling across the country?
We were driving.
In whose car?
I believe it was Adrian's car.
All right. And do you remember what kind of car that was?
I do not.
Fair enough. So you started in Virginia, and did you start to go west?
That's right.
And did you stop anywhere, a note to Mr. Loya that you knew on the way out to, where were you going?
We were going to Seattle.
Okay, to Seattle. Do you remember if you stopped anywhere?
Yeah, we stopped at a couple of places. We stopped at national parks. We went hiking. I believe we saw his sister in Utah.
Okay, we'll stop right there for a second.
Yes.
What would you describe his relationship with his sister that you observed to be?
Not distant, but not close.
Okay. During that time, you had been friends with Mr. Loya up to the point you went to visit his sister. How would you describe his relationship with his sister, with that specific sister, if you can?
To be honest, I don't know too much about their relationship.
Fair enough. Did you stop anywhere else with respect to relatives of Mr. Loya's?
We may have visited his father in Texas, but I don't remember.
Fair enough. Anybody else?
As far as I know, no.
Okay. Do you remember stopping to see his mother?
Oh, yes, we did.
Okay. And where was she?
I believe that was New Mexico.
All right. And describe your observations of the interactions between Mr. Loya and his mother in New Mexico.
Not close, but not distant.
Okay. Then where did you go?
I believe we continued on to Seattle.
While you're in New Mexico, did you meet anybody else?
I don't remember.
Fair. Was there a trip to Mexico? Not New Mexico, Mexico, the country of Mexico.
No, there was not.
Fair enough. So then you went to Seattle, is that right?
That's right.
Did you part ways in Seattle?
That's right.
And how long a period of time was that trip?
A few weeks.
And during that period of time, Mr. Loya was constantly in your presence, right?
That's right.
Other than today, when was the last time that you saw Mr. Loya?
I visited him in Bridgewater
When, though?
last year.
Last year? Okay.
Yeah.
And before that, when was the last time?
The last time I saw him,
Yes, not corresponded, but saw him.
I could not tell you with certainty.
Fair enough. Fair. It's fair to say that most of your interactions would have been, other than that cross-country, after you guys graduated from high school.
So that was a friend of the defendant's that was called to the stand by the prosecution. And Julie, this was a bit unique because usually it's the defendant who calls his friends to the stand. It's not the prosecutors who call the defendant's friends to
Sure.
the stand.
Yeah, unless the defendant's friend has something that the prosecutor thinks is going to be helpful. It sounds like this witness does.
Yeah, here's what jumped out to me. He talks about the defendant telling him that the defendant had many conversations with him about Lisa, the victim, okay? Described working near her, trying to meet her wife on the base. Seemed to see these as good experiences, all changed because of this incident in who became the victim eventually's apartment, and we've heard all these discussions of this. So many conversations about this woman when this thing was going on up in Alaska. It seems to me that the prosecution's trying to insinuate that this defendant was kind of obsessed with this woman.
I think he was.
And this wasn't just, they're not buying, in other words, the defendant's assertion that she was trying to come on to him.
Right. I mean, the truth is, whether she was trying to come on to him or not, it seems clear that that he was obsessed with her. Let's put it this way: if she had come on to him, it wouldn't. The logical conclusion isn't for you to be so obsessed with someone that you go out and kill them. You know. So
Yeah, exactly.
The prosecutor's argument, which is that he was obsessed with her even before this alleged event happened, seems to make more sense in regards to kind of the obsession that leads to eventually him not only killing her but trying to kill someone that she loves.
Well, I agree, and a lot of guests have sat across from me and said, well, Aaron, does it really matter what went on in Alaska? And my response back is that it matters from the standpoint is it just shows how kind of deranged his logic is, that he thinks that if a girl tries to, you know, come on to him somehow, that he takes that as a sexual attack, and it's just like, seriously, no.
I think it does go to his mental health. I mean, you know, obviously, if someone thinks a scenario happened that couldn't have happened, i.e., aliens coming down to abduct you, that's going to have more of an impact than if you have a logical story of a relationship that happened between the two of you and it didn't work out well, so you're upset about it. I mean, there doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence that supports his position that she actually sexually assaulted him. I don't think there's any evidence that happened.
I've heard.
And instead, it seems that the evidence. Remember, this is his friend. There's no reason for him to try to hurt the defendant. You know, so he's trying to be as honest as possible, and he's saying that this guy seemed to be obsessed with this girl.
Well, what does that ultimately tell us for the purposes of the instant prosecution? I mean, because ultimately the question is going to not boil down to whether or not he did it. It's just going to be a question of whether he's guilty or not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. My fear is that the jury, or at least a member thereof, might start getting caught in the weeds over what that actually means, because people hear the phrase not guilty by reason of insanity, and they're like, oh, okay, well, the person's insane, they're crazy, but it's sort of like a legal misnomer. The word doesn't really fit what the law actually says.
I think you know, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but you know, a lot of jurors, when they hear not guilty by reason of insanity, they become extremely concerned that they're letting the person out on the street.
And that's not what happened.
Exactly. And so, but jurors don't know that. And so jurors, you know, unfortunately, they're not supposed to be thinking about that, but I think inevitably they do. And so if I'm a juror sitting there hearing about an individual that not only shot a woman, shot a police officer, set, you know, fire to vehicles, may pretend to have bombs, like you name it, the thought that I'm the person who potentially is going to have him not be in prison, or at least believe that he's going to be out on the street, that is going to have an impact, I think, inevitably on most jurors. And that's why I think that these type of cases are very difficult to prove on the defense side. One thing I do want to add, though, is when you said, why does it matter? Well, the defense's theory is that, she came on to him and kind of ruined his life, and so he went into like a turmoil. The fact that the prosecution's trying to show that's not true kind of undercuts the defense's theory, because A, it makes it sound like on top of everything he's a liar, the defendant, and B, remember, by saying that, it almost by the defense saying that about the victim, it starts to dirty up the victim, and the prosecutor saying, no, the victim was a good woman who didn't do anything to him, you know what I mean? So, and you want the jury to kind of have that sense without the defense trying to dirty her up.
I agree with the analysis in so much that you said, I think you just answered why we had this friend be called.
Right.
Because the key to it is that the friend is starting to say, well, it's the defendant who was kind of obsessed with this woman, whether it was severe obsession or mild obsession. We're not really clear, at least
well,
at this point.
I think we know
where it
because
is.
the woman's dead, and
well, I mean,
Yeah,
well, I'm talking about before the whole allegation that,
Sure.
that there was this flirtatious, wine-infused thing going on, according to the defendant up there. Okay, but again, if the prosecution's got to carry the burden here, they're going to want to get this guy on and say, look, okay, well, look at the way this defendant was acting towards the victim even before this incident that the defendant is trying to use as an excuse.
Exactly.
This goes back before the incident.
Remember, the prosecution's job is to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt, and so they're smart because, in this case, because they're covering everything and they're not letting anything go past them. And I think this witness is helpful. It might not be the most important person in this case, but I think he's pretty helpful. He's a little bit helpful for the defense because he does, or at least he can articulate to the members of the jury that the defendant was not mentally all there, but I don't think he does it to such a degree that would rise to the level of finding him not guilty.
I think the case is going to rise or fall based on the defendant's interrogation. That's been the most important thing that's been into evidence, at least as of yet.
Sure. No, that and the fact that all the actions he took that corroborate basically what he said happened, which are established not only through the eyewitnesses but through video. I mean, there's so much evidence against him that supports what he said.
Let's talk about burden of proof here, because in some states, the burden of proof on mental disease or defect is ultimately the defendant's. The defendant needs to prove that he or she suffers from something in order to apply the defense.
Right.
Well, in Massachusetts, the burden is on the state to prove that the defendant wasn't suffering. So once the defendant raises the defense in Massachusetts, then it just, in essence, the defendant pops up a hurdle that the state then has to jump over.
Right.
It's a little bit different burden of proof.
Similar to self-defense in New York. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which, by the way, again, goes back to the fact that the prosecution needs to make sure that they're basically covering every area to protect themselves and to be able to establish to the jury that this does not rise to the level of someone who didn't know the difference between right or wrong. And so, yeah, it becomes much more pressure on them because they're not just proving that he did it, they're proving that he did it and that he had the mental capacity to do it.
I want to continue listening to the testimony of the friend. This is the cross-examination. I have said many times, I think the defense attorney is doing a great job with not a lot to work with. I think his cross-examinations have been very powerful. I'm very curious to see how he deals with this mental disease or defect defense once he gets to call the medical experts who he has promised to call. But let's listen to the defense attorney's cross-examination of the defendant's friend.
So when you're ready, please.
Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Allen.
Good morning.
Mr. Glenny began speaking with you, sir, and asked you about first meeting Adrian, and I believe you suggested that was high school.
Yes.
How old are you now?
I'm 32 years old.
Okay, so we're going back now some 15, 17 years, is that fair?
That's fair to say.
Probably 14 or 15 as a freshman when you first met Adrian,
Yes.
and your only class together was Spanish.
as far as I remember.
Okay. And neither of you liked it.
That's correct.
But you somewhat maintained that relationship through your high school years.
That's right.
And when I say friendship, you'd see each other in the hall and or in at least this one Spanish class you took. You didn't take that for 4 years, correct?
That's right.
And on occasion, would you meet or talk outside of school?
Often.
I mean, well, when you say often, we weren't text messaging back then, right?
That's right.
So it'd be an occasional call, is that it?
We would hang out in person.
Okay. And this is again when you're some 15 years old, true?
That's right.
But you also, even back then, sir, characterized your relationship or characterized the two of you as very private people, right?
That's fair to say.
To help us with that, I mean, describe that to us. That's a conclusion.
We both had, I would say, limited pools of friends. We spent a lot of time together. We discussed things together.
It's just you and he, right?
That's correct.
Because you use the expression, it's just different than I would use, limited pool of friends. That was your word, right?
Yes.
And it was just really the two of you. Is that fair?
Well, I mean, I believe we both had friends outside of this one friendship.
Oh, well, you knew other people, right?
That's right.
I mean, and the other thing you shared together was this this swimming. You both swam. Mm-hmm. Being somewhat lanky probably helped you in that regard, right?
Yes.
And again, somewhat of a solitary sport. I mean, it's an individual sport, right?
Yes, that's right.
And did you do that, or did he do that for 4 years?
Not as far as I know.
Okay, how many years? How many years with you, sir?
I think I was only on the swim team for 1 year.
Okay, and had he made the team that year?
I think we were all just part of the team. I don't know if there was making a team.
Okay, we were all just part of the team that 1 year. Mm-hmm. And do you remember what
Yes.
year of year 4 that was by chance?
The numerical year?
Yeah, like freshman, sophomore?
I believe that was freshman year.
Okay. So when Mr. Glennie asked you about things like team meets and team get-togethers and all that, we're just talking about one season of freshman year, true?
That's fair to say.
Okay. And so there weren't any big parties or anything, right?
Not that I remember, no.
And neither of you, if you know, well, you didn't swim after that freshman year, and neither did Mr. Loya.
I'm sorry, is that a question or?
Yes.
Oh, as far as I know, yes.
Outside of the school in the 1 year of swimming, though, did you two start, on occasion, you'd play these video games?
Yes.
And, I mean, we're, again, 15, so what year would that be?
Throughout high school?
No, what year was your freshman year as best you can?
The numerical year?
Yes.
I could not tell you.
I think you were asked about the internet.
Yes.
Was it up and running by then, sir?
I don't remember the exact year that I got internet, but I feel like in high school I had some way of accessing it, yes.
Because you do recall you were playing video games and so forth, and this was a particular like that the two of you enjoyed, right?
That's right.
Mr. Glennie asked you about such things. What did you two enjoy? And you said such things as, I believe it was killing monsters or something, right?
Well, there was a wide variety of games we played.
Well, competitive games, kill monsters, wide variety of video games, true?
That's right.
And the two of you would do that while you were apart and together at times, is that fair?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Now, there weren't any other sports that you two were involved in, right?
Other sports, no.
Again, the both of you were somewhat solitary, is that fair?
Oh, that's fair to say.
I mean, at times you even heard people refer to him kind of a geek, right?
A geek?
Maybe a nerd,
Okay, maybe a nerd.
is that fair?
That's probably fair to say, yes.
Did the two of you ever go to a high high school party?
High school party. Not that I can recall, no.
I mean, and don't take offense. This guy, at least in high school, is not the life of the party, right?
Yeah, I guess that's fair to say.
And he does nothing else other than a year of swimming and attends school. Fair?
That sounds correct, yes.
No other clubs or interests in school? For instance, math, chess, any of that, if you recall.
I don't recall anything specific.
Now, again, and I can understand from after high school on, there was a parting of the ways, meaning you went to college in DC, right?
That's right.
He, as best you know, he stayed in and around Texas, right?
I could not say with certainty.
Okay. Well, would a refresh your memory, if he ever took a stab at a community college or?
That does sound like something he tried, yes.
And perhaps, and now I'm moving in after high school, you're in college, so did you go 4 years at DC?
I did not know.
How many years you were there?
At George Washington, I was there for 2 years.
Where'd you go from there?
Well, so my first school was the University of Texas at El Paso,
Okay,
and then I transferred to George Washington University. My third year of college, I went to Japan and I studied at Nanzan University in Japan, and then I returned to Washington, D.C.
just as a reference point, referencing those 4 years, it's fair to say it was very intermittent, your contact now with Adrian. Fair?
That's fair to say, yes.
I mean, obviously, you're in different parts of the country and/or world. Is this when, sir, you answered Mr. Glennie that maybe you talk once every 2 months?
We may have spoken more frequently than that. It's very difficult for me to remember the exact frequency of our conversations.
Okay. Well, at some point, sir, Mr. Glennie asked you, you indicated there was a conversation about him or his interest in joining the military,
That's right.
and the Coast Guard particularly.
That's right.
We're using as a point of reference your going to Japan, sir. What year was that?
It was the year after I graduated from college.
When did you graduate from college?
You have to understand, I live by a digital calendar, and it's very difficult for me to recall specific days or events,
Or years?
or years even.
Okay. I'm just trying to get us around to, would it help you if I were to suggest Mr. Loya enlisted in around 2004 or 5?
That sounds right to me.
Okay. Where is Mr. Heller in 2004 or 5, if you know?
I must have been in college.
Okay. But again, we seem to, or I adopted the word intermittent. Your communication with Adrian is stretched out. There'd be long stretches, in other words, without you speaking to Adrian, right?
That's right.
Okay. And at least at some point during these infrequent communications, though, you learn that he did enlist. True?
That's right.
And at least you came to understand that at some point he was in Virginia,
That's right.
or stationed in Virginia, right?
Yes.
But had you got out of college by that point?
I believe I had, because I believe I went to his apartment and stayed with him for a period of time between college and joining the JET program.
Okay, somewhere in Virginia?
Yes.
He was already a coastie. Or a
Yes.
coast guard, right?
Yes.
And again, how long did you stay with him in his apartment?
A few weeks.
Okay. Didn't meet any other friends he had in and around there, did you?
No, we mostly hung out together.
It's just the two of you, right?
That's right.
And you had some time to catch up, right?
That's right.
Fair to say this fellow you've now known for 5 to 10 years to let solitary loner, right?
Yes, that's how I would categorize him.
Now, you then went,
That began with a cross-examination dealing with the relationship between the defendant and his friend on the witness stand. Again, the friend was called by the prosecution. Julie, you listened to that cross-examination just now. What do you think the defense attorney was trying to get at?
I'm not sure because I didn't hear it all. I know that they're at some point, I don't know if it's before or after this, he does start to question him about kind of his mental issues. The only thing I think we were talking about is it seems as though he's trying to paint the defendant as someone who was kind of a loner. I don't know if that feeds into the whole kind of discussion they were having about him having autism or being on the spectrum, that he wasn't really like a guy who socialized, so somehow he was socially inept.
He points to his own client and says this guy was never the life of the party.
Right. I don't know how that necessarily helps him. I mean, being the life of the party does not a mental defect make, but I guess he's trying to lay the groundwork, at least, that this guy had some type of issues way before, and that he wasn't just like a jock like everyone else, like hanging out at parties, but just swimming and going to school.
Well, he was on a team, though, and I think that this witness tried to initially set up the defendant as somebody who maybe was more reserved socially, but who there wasn't really anything wrong with. At least that's the way I took it.
Yeah, except then you do start to hear, at least in later years, at least from my understanding of the later cross-examination, that it seems to be that there's some mental issues brewing that even this witness potentially knows enough that he brings it up to the defendant to kind of say, like, what's going on with you, what's wrong?
Well, let's continue to explore that entire chain of thought, because that's exactly where that cross-examination went. We'll play our last clip for the day before we break for the weekend. This is more cross-examination of the defendant's friend, who ironically was called by the prosecution.
most of the time, things of that nature?
Yeah, he described the temperature, as you mentioned, and also the fact that it was light or dark for long periods of time.
Not an easy existence. Do you recall that?
I know his dad had concerns.
Well, again, getting to you, sir, he then told you about this other person, Lisa, right? And she needs to hear it.
Yes.
How many times of these infrequent telephone calls did he mention her? As best you can, I'm not holding it.
He mentioned her on most of his phone calls when we were speaking about Alaska.
Did he mention anybody else?
Not that I recall.
Mention any other hobbies?
I mean, he mentioned maybe hiking.
Okay. And, well, he eventually gets around in the conversation about her having been or in a relationship with another woman, right?
That's right.
But he didn't express any problems with you because she may have had an alternative lifestyle, did he?
He did not express any problems, no.
You didn't know him to be a guy like that, did you?
No, I did not.
But he did, at least at the beginning or at some point, indicate that she was his friend.
That's right.
But other than that, some issues did arise, right?
Yes.
Some of those issues he aired or spoke to you about, sir, it began to give you some concerns, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
I mean, you were asked, I think the quote was, to give you concerns about his mental health. Remember Mr. Grundy asked you that?
Yes, I do.
Okay, well, sir, in fact, it did give you some pretty significant concerns, didn't it?
There were times when I was concerned, yes.
Okay, well, when you say concerned, it rose to a level, sir, that you even told him, you better see somebody.
I told him that, yeah, he should speak to someone about what was going on.
When I say speak to someone, specifically, it was a shrink or a psychiatrist, right?
I personally didn't know who he should talk to because I didn't understand the structure of the Coast Guard and what he was doing. But as I understood, there was some outlet, and I told him he should at least talk to someone else.
Why?
The way he talked about her went from I want to be her friend to I want to be her friend and I want to be her wife's friend to a point where I believe that we were getting into maybe inappropriate territory in the sense of these two people had a relationship and he seemed to be wanting to get into that relationship more closely with both of those people.
Fixated on it, right?
Perhaps, yes.
So much so he wasn't even speaking about video games or the like anymore, right?
As time went on, his conversations turned to her.
Utilizing a particular time, and you remember, do you not, sir, his birthday is what date?
The date of his birthday?
His date, it would refresh your memory if I would suggest February 5th.
Okay, that sounds right.
Okay. Utilizing that time, say 2015, sir, when did you speak to him before that date?
Before that date, to be honest, I don't recall. I think I spoke to him once after he left Alaska. Well, twice.
Did you not, sir, or were you not at the Houston airport on a particular day on February 4th where you received a call from Adrian Loya?
That's right.
Okay, you remember that? Now, using that date as a point of reference, sir, when was it, as best you can, this call with him, when you expressed your concerns about his mental state at the time, sir?
That was years before.
Okay? So it was years before that had happened when you had that conversation.
That's right.
And his response to you, sir, as best you can remember, that call about the maybe getting checked out?
He, as far as I know, he didn't see anyone about it.
As far as you know, but did he, how did he respond when you indicated, hey, you better see somebody, or words to that effect?
I would have to say that maybe that it was fine, not to worry about it.
You don't really remember, or do you?
To be honest, I don't remember.
Okay. Now, you recall, sir, or do you recall, that he would buy action figures and the like, if you know?
I do, yes.
And did they hold a particular interest to him, if you know?
I did know that he bought quite a few of very expensive action figures, and he had them sent to his father's house in Texas.
Okay. Now, I mean, did any of these action figures or the like, for instance, make the cross-country trek with you?
No, they did not.
Okay. And at some point, sir, he had a conversation with you and he told you about this outfit called Giant Bomb. Does that ring a bell?
That's right, yes.
Help us, what is that?
Giant Bomb is a website where they review and cover video games, industry events, computing, electronics to some degree, and it's a community of people who have memberships to the website and discuss things on discussion boards.
Okay. Kind of these 3 or 4 nerdy guys up in a warehouse that play with games and put themselves on the stream themselves, right?
That's right, yes.
There. And in doing so and playing with these games and so on and so forth, they do it while they're streaming or all over the radio to people to watch and or listen to, right?
That's right.
And in this relatively long trek you made across the country, in fact, you and Adrian listened or watched those guys up in that warehouse, right?
Yeah, we listened to their podcasts while we were driving.
I didn't have that word, podcast. When I say look at it, there's a podcast.
Well, it was just an audio-only podcast, yes.
Well, so you were familiar with them if and when he would bring up the Giant Bomb people, you knew what that was all about, right?
That's right, yes.
At some point, sir, on or about, if you recall, it was the February 4th conversation with him when he mentioned that outfit of those fellows podcasting Giant Bomb, right?
That's right.
What did he say to you?
He said he called me because he wanted me to watch a video. He had sent them some items, and he said watching the video would make me happy or it would make me laugh.
What items?
In the conversation, he did not say what the items were.
Okay, but he didn't tell you he had sent in something or anything?
Well, I mean, he told me he sent a package and that I should watch the video.
Okay, pursuant to that, did you watch something?
I did, yes.
He'd given a bunch of his personal expensive items to these folks, didn't he?
That's right.
Now, watching that, did that cause you some concern?
At the time, it did not, just because he had given me expensive items before, and he was very involved in giant bombs, so I didn't find that to be completely out of character.
In and around, I'll take you back a bit, sir, to the time you indicated about the Lisa conversations with him, okay? Again, she...
Yes.
Sir, did you have a conversation and/or did he share with you a letter he had written to her?
He may have, or he may have just talked about it.
Okay, when you say it and I said letter, please tell us what you know of that.
I want to say he said it was a letter. Yeah, that's how I would describe it.
Well, let me go back then a bit, sir. You talked about, in our answer to Mr. Glennie, you talked about an incident that happened in her apartment, right?
That's right.
And you suggested that he thought something about it may jeopardize his life in the Coast Guard, right?
That's right.
And those aren't just your words, those are words you gleaned from conversations with him.
That's right.
Okay. Well, sir, do you recall him telling you that he
The most interesting nugget that came out of that clip of testimony, I think, is this discussion between the friend who's on the witness stand and the defendant from a number of years ago, where the friend told the defendant, hey, look, you need to start talking to somebody in counseling in the Coast Guard. Julie, what did you make of that?
Again, he's making out that he had some type of mental illness. I'm sure he did, you know, keep in mind that the issue seemed to be all revolving around this woman. So it wasn't like he was having a breakdown outside of it. This friend was concerned that this defendant was too obsessed with this woman and potentially her wife. Does that help the defense or does that help the prosecution? I don't know, because I mean, I tend to think at the end of the day it really helps the prosecution, because all it's doing is basically explaining that, by the way, the friend even said to him, something's wrong, and it seems that he's aware that he's obsessing about this person and is still choosing to kind of pursue, you know, the relationship with them, whatever it is, and then eventually doing that of which is kind of thought out and planned out to kind of cause her demise, whether it be because he thinks she hurt him or because he felt that they rejected him, whatever it is. But again, I don't think this is going to move the ball for the defense. That's my opinion.
I would hope it's not, and I just put it in the live stream chat room here, but the bottom line is Massachusetts jury instructions on mental disease or defect say as follows: either a defendant is substantially unable to appreciate the criminality or the wrongfulness of his conduct, or is substantially unable to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law. In other words, it's what we've been saying. They don't know right from wrong. But I'm also keying in on the substantially. Someone has to substantially be unable to appreciate the criminal nature of the conduct.
Well, substantially unable to conform. Is that what it is? Is that
substantially unable to appreciate the criminality or the wrongfulness of his conduct.
Right, right. And again, when you talk about kind of the crime itself, he did everything with the knowledge that he was doing something wrong, you know? So
and he said so to the police in the interrogation.
Right. I mean, he sets the fire because he wants, you know, to be able to kill the women, and he, you know what I mean?
Before
he brings
they
the ammunition.
get there, and
exactly.
then when they get to him, he wants him to shoot him.
Right. So it's, to me, it's it's thoroughly thought out, and he clearly knows the difference. This is not, to me, in my experience, rise to the level of an individual who has no concept. You know, there's people that you know of that, like, you know, don't even understand that what they're doing in any fashion is wrong. I mean, there's some people that think that, you know, the person they're killing isn't even a person, they're not even a human being. They think that there's voodoo and don't even grasp kind of the nature of what they're doing. To me, he's nowhere near that. He sounds like a guy who liked a woman, perhaps, and didn't like either how they treated him or didn't feel that it was reciprocated and became obsessed, and this is what he did. That is not the defense under the law of insanity.
Yeah, that's what I think. So I'm hoping that the jury does not confuse these standards. There is a mental health standard for mental health issues, and then there is a legal standard, and they kind of use some of the same words, but they're not the same thing.
I think that's for the, you know, I think the prosecution, it's incumbent upon them from the beginning to the end, and I say this all the time to kind of drill it into the juror's head, that it's okay if you believe he has a mental illness, you know, and you can accept that he has a mental illness. The question is, does it fit into the law that the judge is going to describe? And it doesn't. And then kind of laying out every piece of evidence that explains why it is that he might be ill and he's allowed to be ill, but that doesn't mean you excuse him.
I agree, and I think the prosecutor needs to make it very clear. But we are a little bit after 5 o'clock, and it's time to wrap up for a long weekend. Julie Rendelman, LawNewz trial analyst, good to see you here again.
Thank you for just using one.
I knew you were going to say that.
I
You
really
also
appreciate it.
are
This is
known
such
as
a special moment.
criminal defense attorney and
Best
former
friend,
prosecutor,
right.
acquaintance.
Yeah, barely know.
I'll see you later.